Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Study of Religions Research Seminar Series. We're delighted to have Dr. Tatiana Vagramenko, who is a senior postdoctoral researcher in our Study of Religions department and also the Future Humanities Institute at University College Cork. She serves as a principal investigator in the Science Foundation Ireland Irish Research Council Pathway Project, titled History Declassified, the KGB and the Religious Underground in Soviet Ukraine. And in the British Library EAP project, Religious Minorities Archives and the War in Ukraine. Drawing upon extensive field experience and archival research, her focus is on the anthropology of religion in post-Soviet Ukraine and Russia. She is co-author with James Capello, who's here beside her, of Hidden Galleries, Material Religion in the Secret Police Archives in Central and Eastern Europe, that came out with Lit Verlag in 2020, and with Nadia Belyakova of The Secret Lives of Soviet Secret Agents, Religion and Police Surveillance in the USSR from Lexington Books, which is forthcoming this year. So we're looking forward to your lecture titled When the Ghosts of History Speak, Endangered Community Archives and Collaborative Anthropology in Times of War.
Thank you, Jenny, very much, and thank you everyone for joining this seminar. I'll start with sharing my presentation. I think I can do it. Okay. Please, can you?
Yeah, we can see it. Yeah.
Well, I decided to talk today about things that is not strictly and directly originally related to my research project. I call it normally as a side effect, the story that becomes a side effect of my project. I'm an anthropologist of religion, and for many years I've been studying the history and the politics of religion in Ukraine and Russia. As well as my ongoing project is a kind of anthropological history, historical anthropology of religious minorities in Ukraine during the Soviet period. Mainly work with those communities that in the Soviet period were outlawed, and they formed the so-called religious underground. It's mainly Protestant communities, but also Greek, Ukrainian, Greek Catholic, and other communities that were during the Soviet period somehow repressed and were targeted by the Soviet secret police, the KGB. When the war began, when the whole-scale invasion in 2022 in Ukraine began, I found myself having both professional and existential crisis as an anthropologist and as a Ukrainian. I was never trained as an anthropologist of war. I never intended to do my research in conflict zones. And in this regards, I share this lack of experience with many of my colleagues. None of us were prepared to study war. And at some point when I began with my project, this coincided with the beginning of the war. I was even the point of quitting academia. I couldn't write, I couldn't read. What for? I always ask myself, because I had no sense and I saw no meaning in what I was doing. Who reads our articles? Who reads our books? What have we done or what have we not to prevent the catastrophe unfolding in the community that we've been studying? And these questions weigh heavily upon us, particularly when we have spent many years cultivating bonds of trust and friendships with our research participants, only to witness their lives and their homes lying in ruins due to war. So what can we do when interview fail, when participant observation demands more participation than observation, and when individuals and communities you work with ask for help? So in my presentation today, I try to kind of reflect on my own methodological uncertainties my research in my own search for new methodologies to address these both emerging challenges in my profession and my life. I try to process not only the war, but also my research, my relationship with research participants, and my role as anthropologist. So I will be talking today about religious minority communities, mainly Protestants, only Protestants in this case, in the case of today's presentation, and their archives. These archives are unique repositories of historical memory that became so vulnerable amidst Russia's aggression against Ukraine. And this kind of the historical memory and the power dynamic in the construction of the historical memory is the focus of my research today. And given their minority status and sometimes lack of official registration with state authorities, these communities fight on their own to protect their historical legacy nowadays, their archives, their prayer houses, and at times their very lives. So I follow the stories of several archives and try to see, to follow how they acquired their power and how they were being reimagined, re-narrated, and physically rescued. And so I will tell you today briefly, or not maybe less briefly, 2 stories out of many that I have. And again, these stories came as this side effect of my ongoing project on history declassified, the KGB and the religious underground in Soviet Ukraine. For many years by now, I've been working with documents from the Soviet secret police archives, the KGB archives in Ukraine, trying to reconstruct stories from the religious underground, stories of surveillance, of communities of repression, secret operations conducted by the secret police among religious groups. And my idea was that while collecting this huge amount of data and reconstructing this history from the state archives, I wanted to start working with community archives, treating them as counter archives, as German-American anthropologist Sonia Luhrmann called it, as repositories of alternative memories. And this moment when I planned to start working with communities, bringing the stories that I found from the KGB archives, the stories of collaboration, the stories of secret operations, sometimes kind of ethically difficult, but I wanted to process this history. I wanted to discuss these stories with them, with the communities, and in a way work with their community, with their archives. And this part of my project coincided with the beginning of the war, and of course is dramatically. The war has quite dramatically changed the focus of my research. I start with probably particularly with it would be productive for our MA students with the argument from Marco Rolf Troyot's book Silencing the Past, and his understanding of history that is not just about what happened in the past, but also about how those events are interpreted and represented in the present. His idea was the production of the historical knowledge is intertwined with power and with political power, and the production of history is the production of political power, when certain voices and representatives are often marginalized or silenced in official accounts. And that was my kind of starting point when I was doing research in KGB archives, in the Soviet secret police archives, how these voices, the voices of minority communities, of religious faith groups, were marginalized and silenced in official accounts. And in this case, the community archives I've been working with becomes not just mere repositories of historical documents. They become contested sites of power, of memory, and historical agency. So that is particularly becomes important, this approach, with what is called memory wars that is going on as part of the Russo-Ukrainian wars. This a number of a range of scholars argue that this war, the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, partly caused by Russia's failure to adequately confront and process its Soviet past. Russia's failure to dissociate from its Soviet history, along with the lack of societal reckoning with the crimes of the Soviet regime, that this partly sparked what is known as the memory wars. So this shows the enduring power of historical legacies in shaping present realities. And in this context, the local communities and the archives I will be talking about wield new force and new agency. But you probably would ask how this all related in the to the ongoing war. That's the Soviet periods ended 30 years ago. The current, if you remember, probably that was widely discussed at the eve of the war. Putin broadcasted his speech to the people. Basically, that was a kind of tricky way of declaring the war. And he delivering his speech to the people, he became, while physically, practically beginning his invasion in Ukraine, he began us with a history lecture. And actually, it was broadcasted to Russia a few hours before the beginning of the invasion. And in his speech, that was over an hour long, he evoked memories of the Soviet history and the Second World War, claiming that Ukraine is a legitimate state, a mere mistake of the Soviet project. So, as you see, Soviet history is very much intertwined in the armed conflict, and the memory wars became something very important and sparked the actual ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. And in this case, local communities and their archives wield new force and agency. So that's a kind of a little bit awkward introduction to actually the stories that I wanted to tell you. And it sounds all a little bit raw because I've been working not only with documents, I've been working with myself, with my methodologies that basically I have to assemble from the scratch because of the of these completely uncharted waters for me while doing research in the war-torn country. So I will tell you today about two stories about two archives. All archives that I'm studying have an amazing story. Some of them will be stolen, relocated, smuggled, destroyed, or conversely opened in time of war after many decades of being concealed from outsiders' eyes. The story of the stolen archive remains a kind of significant moral dilemma to me. I'm still not sure how or whether I should write about this case or talk about this because it involves some serious legal and ethical issues. Yet it stands as one of the most important cases in my research that sheds light on the enduring Soviet legacy in resilience of Soviet forms and practices in religious sphere. So in October 2022, I met a minister, or I would call him Feder, of one faith community that I do not name in a town in Ukraine that I do not name either. I came to his prayer house for the interview, to interview him about the history of his community, about process of legalization in the post-Soviet period, and I knew that the minister of this community was a man of history, and he was kind of known as a person that interested in history and collecting lots of materials. I came to his prayer house for the interview not alone. I was accompanied by my gatekeeper, who introduced me to several religious communities in this town. The gatekeeper was a retired professor of a local university. I knew him as a person who published extensively about the history of religious communities in this area, and ask him for help to help me arrange interviews with local communities. He gladly agreed and joined me, which was to my surprise. He joined me to every single interview that I conducted. He was interested in the topic of our conversation because I was always, of course, asking about collaboration stories, about infiltration with secret police archive, secret agents, and stories about secret informers and so on. My interest was on collaboration stories and the everyday surveillance practices during the Soviet period. As we sat in Fedor's office in his prayer house, the three of us, including Professor, I noticed an unusual tension. While I was asking questions to Fedor, he was not addressing his answer to me directly, but kind of rather responding to the professor who was sitting behind me. So his gaze passing by me and answering him. And every question I asked him, he was answering to him, which I felt that as if there was a hidden dialogue between them. In the next several days, when I went with Professor to interview three more representatives of different communities, happened the same. I was asking the questions, but the answers were given kind of passing by me to a professor. Later on, when the interview was finished with Fedor, going back to Fedor, he called me an hour later when I left him, and apologizing and asking me to come back the following day alone. The next day, he said to me, I quote, "You must understand that I couldn't say everything in front of the professor. Of course, I was already saying more than I should because I have nothing left to fear. But still, the professor is following everything I say." And he confirmed what I was already suspecting. The professor and my gatekeeper in research on policing religions in the USSR was actually part of the system. During the Soviet era, he worked for the KGB, being responsible for monitoring certain religious communities in the region. And for many years, he served as one of the main channels between faith communities in the region and the Soviet authorities. And he controlled and surveilled them all. And furthermore, despite being retired, and we're talking about 2022, and no longer active, the influence of his former position still lingered. I later interviewed the professor himself, and he told me more or less the full story, which I do not include in this presentation because I still have to process it. But one thing that I would quote from him, he said to me, "I still keep them all under control. These connections was never severed, never truly ended even after 30 years of Ukraine's independence." Fedor, the minister of the faith community, lamented that the authorities nowadays kept pressing him, always trying to control. I quote, "Even these days, they constantly come to me and say, 'Well, you're an honest person, let's collaborate.' Well, precisely because I am an honest person, I don't want to be bothered. I've had enough of the Soviet period. I already struggled with them back then," unquote. But this was not the reason actually Fedor wanted to see me again. As a man of history, whose eyes sparkled anytime we talked about things from the past, he wanted to narrate his own account of events without Professor. And being interested, actually very interested in the topic of my research, he wanted to work with me, actually, to co-write a new history. He says, "Let's write together about this all, about how people collaborated with the secret police, how they recruited secret informers and agents, giving all the names in an open and direct way, so that everybody knows, and to prevent such things from happening again," unquote. He then showed to me his real treasure. And now again, going closer to the archive, he put a bulky plastic bag on the table. This was his secret archive hidden for many, many years. Inside were dozens of folders that I immediately recognized. It was documents from one Soviet-era state archive, typical folders of surveillance and records on religious communities in the region from the Soviet period. In the next few days, I was coming every day to Fedor's prayer house. He brought many more such plastic bags. full of documents. These records spanned several decades, detailing the life of his community, their members, photographs of prayer houses, correspondence between various state organs, surveillance reports, intercepted letters, and more. The full account of how the state monitored, oppressed, and surveilled religious life. When I ask how on earth the whole archive with many hundreds of documents ended up under his desk in his office, he told me that back in the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet state, when Ukraine got its independence, Fedor managed to bribe an archivist from one state archive and basically stole an entire archival collection related to his community from a state archive. He says, "This is the entire history of my community, so it belongs to us, not to them." With these materials, the community tried to restore hidden pages of their history, traces the story of their predecessors, reconstruct events that shaped the identity and of their community. They wanted to identify those among them who secretly collaborated with the regime and spied on one another. Fedor wanted to share his treasure with me, trusting me and suggesting that we write this history together. He wanted me actually to digitize this archive, and he insisted on this because he was afraid that it would be destroyed during the war. And that actually was the reason why he revealed this stolen archive and shared it with me. So in the next several days, I was digitizing an archival collection I knew I would never be able to show to anyone, nor use it for research, because it's stolen. But Fedor insisted. For him, this was the way to fight the enduring impact of the Soviet legacy, which continued to influence the lives of himself and his community, and possibly many others in Ukraine. This was an act to resist, so this would not happen again, as he kept repeating. So this case underscores how Soviet habitus sometimes is persisting in meaning-making, in practices, in communication, revealing that the Soviet past often remains unresolved, and not only on a high political level, but on a grassroots level as well, and still influence contemporary society. And it was the ongoing war that helped to unveil these hidden forms and practices, and that gave an agency and power to for Fedor to resist it. His phone call after the interview, his invitation to return without the professor, his revelation of the stolen archive, and his insisting for me to digitize this archive was an act of resistance against this legacy. I think I've talked too many, so I'll skip two more cases and we'll tell about the last case about a smuggled archive. I can already tell in this case that this archive belongs to an Adventist community. The archive originally was created in Crimea, and after the occupation of Crimea by Russia in 2014, the creator and the sole curator and creator of the archive, who I would call Artyom, managed to smuggle it from the occupied territory to independent Ukraine, and the archive ended in Bucha, where I discovered 2 years ago. So it was a very dramatic story that Artyom told me, how he managed to smuggle an entire archive while being shadowed by the police. When Crimea was occupied, Artyom is a Crimean like me. He came from Crimea, and as soon as he converted to Adventism in the 1990s, he started collecting documents and material artifacts belonging to his community, to Adventist community in Crimea. When Crimea was occupied in 2014, despite his deep roots in Crimea, spanning generations, Artyom had no intention of staying because he was afraid that the archive would be confiscated and destroyed under the authoritarian regime in Russia. So he made a decision to relocate the archive to Bucha, where the headquarters of the Ukrainian Adventist Church was located and still is located. But how to smuggle an entire archive across the newly established borders? That was a secret operation that he prepared on his own in a complete secrecy. He decided to, he started basically for several months before the actual smuggling, because before the actual operation, he started buying banana boxes from a local fruit market and secretly packing his archive into these boxes. All was done in complete secrecy, but a couple of days before the actual relocation and smuggling, he found out that someone learned about the attempts to smuggle an archive, and he noticed that was a strange car shadowing him. So it was a very risky. If he would be caught, he would end up in the prison. But still, he decided to proceed with this very risky operation. And one day, he rented a big car. He loaded all these boxes, and under the disguise, under the guise that he was relocating himself personally to unoccupied territories, he threw on top of the boxes all his personal belongings, furniture, mattresses, pillows, the collection of live birds, the collection of potted flowers, and everything. And in the middle of the night, at 2 in the morning, expecting that the custom control would be kind of less attentive and sleeping, he crossed the border, bribed the custom control with some, not with money, but some flower pots, and basically crossed the border. As he crossed the border, he noticed that there was a siren, the police siren, on the occupied territories. Basically, as he learned several days later, that the police tried to intercept him, but they missed several minutes to catch him. So this is how his archive ended up in Bucha. For 8 years, since 2014, it was more or less stored like this, like in the photograph, with most of the documents still kept in these banana boxes. However, he managed to register this museum archive, and some of the collections showcased in the Museum of the Adventist University. During occupation of Bucha in March 2022, the building where the archive was stored was captured by Russian soldiers. And while they were based there, they damaged furniture, broke windows and doors, stole money, valuables, destroyed all digital devices, and Artem lost all his digital collections. He was devastated when he saw his archive after the liberation of Bucha. He himself survived, luckily. Also, his house was heavily shelled, and he spent the whole month in a basement of his own house. So, but what most bothered him and worried him is the life of his and the fate of his archive. And that was the moment when I met him and when I discovered the story of the smuggled archive. He asked me for help when he saw me in August 2022. But what I could do, I felt really helpless that moment, but thought at the same time that perhaps that was the most important request in all my career as an anthropologist. What could I do? To digitize an entire archive, I will need probably 2 or 3 lifetimes to do this. But still, upon my return, I decided to try. And following the following 2 years, this archive has changed my professional life completely. Upon my return home, I joined several professional associations of archivists and started searching for available programs. And soon an opportunity arose with the Endangered Archives program funded by the British Library. But to apply for the grant to digitize the Bucha archive, I had to start from the scratch and to learn all about digitization techniques, as well as long-term and short-term preservation methods of archives situated in conflict zones. I perceived this as my new anthropological methodology as a field researcher. Starting with no knowledge of scanner types or digital camera technologies, I had to acquire advanced skills in digitization and photography in the field. I had to assemble a near professional photo studio with appropriate equipment and lighting. And furthermore, I had to train an on-site team in the skills which I still needed to assemble. So the whole year before starting the project in 2023, all I was doing was learning about the image standard, lenses, exposure, aperture, types of copy stands, collection care, document handling, processing, digital images, backing up, cataloging, creation of metadata, and much more. I couldn't do anything else but this. And to me, that was my new way of doing collaborative anthropology and of my new methodology as an anthropologist. I received invaluable training and advice from various professionals, including the archivists from the archives of the Security Service of Ukraine. 12 months later, loaded with large boxes and suitcases filled with equipment, including a 20-kilo copy stand for digital camera, I embarked on a journey to Bucha via the Polish-Ukrainian border. It took us a full week, including nights, to set up a photo studio within the archive premises, utilizing spare parts, materials we had on hand. We assembled a giant blackboard for digital photography, and then Artyom and I began digitization, with two students later joining our team. We opened boxes, revealing objects, books, manuscripts, and fall cards that hadn't seen the light of the day for many years. What was most precious of all, that each item stirred memories and sparked stories. Artyom recalled every detail. Each object revived feelings, emotions, and senses, and we recorded many, many hours of these stories. Methodically, we ironed 2 meters long pieces of fabric and fixed them on a giant blackboard that we assembled for digital photography. And we've carefully pieced together fragments of destroyed old photographs. And each item we encountered seems to have its own story to tell. It evoked new memories and revived old stories, sparking hours of conversations. The two young students who assisted us in the project listened to the stories, absorbing the rich history unfolding before them. And together, our collaborative efforts in digitizing the archive proved to be more than just a technical task. It became a means of breathing life back in history, allowing us to preserve and share the stories and experiences embedded within these artifacts, seeding a sense of hope and continuity amid the devastation and despair of war. So that's just a few images, and for each image, I perhaps have from 30 to 1 hour of recorded interviews, and this is all the story of the religious underground in Soviet Ukraine and the stories of resilience and everyday life in a country where their faith were outlawed and where they were considered to be criminals. So just to conclude, the war in Ukraine has exposed many shadow practices and structures, including those related to the religious life. And the experience of death and destructions compelled people to look back to the historical roots of the current crisis, bringing forth the ghosts of the past, the lingering Soviet legacy that became so palpable during wartime, and therefore confronting, rescuing, digitizing, re-narrating history and archives through various means, such as revealing stolen and previously secret archives, or digitizing an endangered archive. This all has become a vital mechanism for grappling with both the historical trauma inflicted by the Soviet authoritarian regime and the ongoing trauma of the war. And in this case, the archives become both witness to history and agents of change. they become an example of a power dynamic that shape alternative historical interpretations, but at the same time, they emerge as vital tools for community activism and even a tools for fostering peace and reconciliations. And this, as this grassroots archivist and historian employ historical research and their archive for searching for ways of peace building and reconciliation in the wartime country. This is all, and thank you. Try to.
So much, Dr. Vagramenko. Any questions or comments?
I still, honestly, it's kind of, to me, is more personal than professional these days. And it takes me a while to process it and to make it public. I write about this a lot, but I think it's one of the first experience of telling about this. And yeah, I haven't talked about a couple of more cases of actually how this previously secret archives that were stored. One of the archives was stored in a wall. Basically, it was inside of the wall for many years in the conservatory of the city. And during the war, they decided to basically to take it out and show it to me. And more than that, the community wanted and insisted that we have to organize a public exhibition where these documents should be exposed to and to juxtapose with documents that I retrieved from the KGB archives. So there's a lot of thing going on, and it's still work in progress, and it's still digitization in progress.
James?
Thanks. Thanks, Tatiana. I mean, I've heard some of those episodes before, but not in that detail and in the way that you now are framing your experience with communities and archives. While you were speaking, the quote. A quote came to mind from it was the Hungarian Minister of Justice sometime in the 1990s, when Hungary was debating what to do with its own secret police archives. He described them as illegitimate documents of an illegitimate regime, and that use of the word, so that projection of the idea of illegitimacy was used as part of an argument to destroy them, which would have taken away their agency to witness. Even though it was it was a statement made with the intention of eliminating the wrong from the past and the damaging possibilities that it contains, but at the same time it would have obliterated the agency of the archives going forward to tell the stories that you're telling. And the reason I thought of it was because you said about the professor and the leader of the community and the stolen archive, and in what sense was it stolen, and in what sense is that problematic, and for who is that problematic? It was stolen to preserve that agentive possibility going into the future, and that, so I understand that it is still it's a profound ethical kind of conundrum, or paradoxical situation, but it just highlights really the complexity of what we do as research. It's like it explodes things into these with a magnifying glass. It's like things that actually play out for most researchers on very small levels. It blows them up into the very clear view in terms of the kind of power and contingencies and agencies at play there. So that's a comment, not really a question. I have a question though, which is, now the digitization, as I understand it, is ongoing, and the funding is there from the British Library, and the team are there working away in Ukraine on digitizing things. But can you tell us a little bit of how you see the life of that archive once it is digitized, between UCC, the project, between the community in Ukraine, between the Ukrainian authorities. So what's the future of that archive?
Well, that's still a lot of issues that I'm currently trying to stir around several stakeholders. I try, because basically sometimes the biggest problem is that the church and the community do not realize the value of this thing. I've been working with Artyom, who is the only one understand, and me, the kind of how priceless is these documents, because the archive is the biggest archive of religious samizdat possibly in the world. But the church doesn't value it because they see only boxes and see the problem that they have to give a space and funding for this, to just at least buy these special archival boxes. So I have to bring this not only to struggle with bureaucracy, but also struggle to make them understand that they are holders of something unique. And I'm in contact with Adventist Church in America, with the British Library to continue this funding and to organize at least physical, not only digital rescuing, but physical rescuing of material. It's a problem. It's still in process, because this should be, only digitizing, we're not saving it. And as a reflection to your first comment, it's a kind of things that kind of struck me, that sometimes maybe it's a little bit too hard to say that these archives cannot exist on their own, but in a way they were created in the Soviet period as a counter archives, in defiance, in a kind of in opposition, in a dialect to the official records. The official record that I've been studying in different state archives. So it's a kind of, they were in a way in a reflection and resistance against this official narrative. And therefore all these communities, they invest so much effort to actually get in and get through all this bureaucracy and access KGB archives. Artyom that I was I was talking about this in the Bucha archive. He spent years trying to access in the 1990s, in late 90s, early 2000, access archives of the Communist Party, of the KGB. They did not allow him because he was a sectarian, because he was an amateur historian. So they were giving him documents, but they did not allow him even to make notes. So he developed shorthand, some kind of notes that he was doing in secret under the table, under the desk, bringing it back home, transcribing, and basically in a literally form gluing these stories. And this collection he values the most. All other communities I work with, they have their own collection of copies of documents from the KGB archive. The Jehovah's Witnesses create this the archive in a way. When they gave it to me, they shared with me some, by now, 10 gigabytes of material of the archive, previously secret, how it's structured. They were doing their own research in KGB archives across Ukraine, in different regions of Ukraine, collecting documents, bringing cases, and then searching for eyewitnesses of this, basically of this criminal file or this secret operation and things like that. They were searching eyewitnesses within the communities and collecting oral history interviews, some photographs and everything, and basically making the archives like this is a KGB archive and this is our oral history archive that would be reflecting juxtaposing. And like this, I've seen archives like in 2 communities more. So it's a kind of things that when they proposed to me make an exhibition, they wanted to exhibit both narratives. They want to basically to make this, to put us face to face of 2 narratives, of the official narrative, the KGB narrative. Sometimes they were not the same, and the narratives of the communities themselves. So it's a polyphony that they insist sometimes to reveal. They want this polyphony. And still lots of things to work.
James? You're muted.
I have a follow-up question, but I wanted to make sure anybody else who has a question has a chance to ask it, because I can talk to you anytime. But
no, we have some time, so go ahead. Yeah.
No, it's just because yeah, the about access, the irony there around access, that the pastor from the community, amateur historian, can't get access to materials, but the foreigner like myself, you know, in Moldova and Romania can. And of course, that was one of the main kind of catalysts or ideas for the Hidden Galleries project, was to try and kind of, you know, subvert the system that was set up there, to make sure that, you know, communities have knowledge that they can get access, even though it's difficult, and how to do it, and then, you know, what to do with materials, or what they might find there. So yeah, but it's again, it's I think there are parallels in Ireland. I don't know, Tina, maybe you know better, but it's to do with mother and baby homes, maybe Jenny as well, to do with the access to records from Magdalene laundries and mother and baby homes that are protected by the state from the very people that should have that information. In Eastern Europe, the innovation that was brought in relation to transitional justice was information compensation. So we can't give you anything else back. We can't give you life back. We can't give you, you know, sometimes we can't give you your property back, but we can give you the information as a way of starting that process of reconciliation. Mm-hmm. But like, I think with the KGB archives in Ukraine, and certainly in Russia, but you know, in Ireland too, the grapple with, and that's that maybe wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, Jenny, Tina, to do with, you know, GDPR and, you know, the protection of kind of the individual, but of course, what's the wider societal good that should be served, and do we therefore allow for a little bit of collateral damage on, you know, to individuals or smaller groups of communities for the wider good, and how do you balance those things?
Yeah. Well, the lucky thing for Ukraine is just that from the legislation is so in favor of opening everything unconditionally. That's, of course, it has its own pro and contra, because it can be used as a kind of re-traumatization. But and still, I guess, in post-war or wartime, and I'd say would be even more important for post-war period, to revise both legislation and everything. And well, it's just another thing. As I was digitizing one archive in Bucha, 3 more contacted me asking for, can we join the project? Can we do the same? And an interesting thing that every local, not every, but some local communities in wartime decided to expand their archives, their collections, and more communities are starting collecting and making their collections of war crimes, which of course brings my research and in an absolutely unknown direction, but it's something that for them is relevant, a relevant and logical extension of their collection. And I have, for example, an archive that's in Bucha archive that already has like 2,000 documents documenting war crimes during Bucha massacre, and they want this also to digitize, and because they want this, and that becomes a clear tool for justice and for activism and community activism. So it has so many tails and it has so many directions that it's scary, but it's something that gives meaning to me, at least. I have more questions than answers. Please, Tina,
I was research should always be. It should always end with more questions, and it's just that's the journey we're on. Yeah.
Tina.
I just wanted to say thanks. That's a really powerful report from the field. I have to head off now, but certainly it does also give me that impression that you've gone down a certain rabbit hole. And as with many reluctant or accidental archivists, it's a something turns into a bit of a lifetime project in many ways, and one leads to another because you've acquired a set of skills and understandings here that are really valued by communities. and sought after. And it's incredible to see the enthusiasm with which people approach those kinds of projects. So yes, that your experience resonates with me a little bit, but it's also an area where, of course, you need to be on the lookout for personal preservation and you know, being able to nurture yourself enough to be able to continue with the work and to know what your boundaries are with it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's true that we're all talking about collaboration, collaborative methods. And in this case, it's a kind of a disbalance, but a different way of disbalance, because there are too much of initiative from my research participants that sometimes I'm kind of being drawn and being directed by them, which is great. But at the same time, when I lose myself, when I lose my initiative, it becomes a problem, a professional problem, and of course, personal problem as well. And when you enter these uncharted waters and you see that the activists, or when I first went with this project, with my project after the whole war, escalation of the war, and I was like, what am I doing? People are struggling with themselves just to survive. And I came here and I felt like I'm completely useless and like really unethical sometimes. But it was the opposite. Like they were waiting for person as one of the person making a phone call and sending me actually to Bucha. He said, well, there is a researcher coming from Ireland, and you see, we save souls, she saves history. And yeah, in this collaboration, sometimes I'm too much led by my research participants. And in this case, yeah, my own personal preservation comes to, for the first time, not for the first time in my professional career, but yeah, when I was doing research in the Arctic with indigenous people, I was just trying to survive while eating raw meat and fish. And here I'm trying to navigate in this ocean of emotions and ideas, and yeah. Thanks. Thank you.
The International Council of Archives, and also there's the SUV, there's I think it's universities and learning institutions is sort of a subsection. They have a lot of very good resources just across the board in terms of trauma-informed archiving, and also a community of archivists. So if you're not already kind of plugged in there, I really would recommend them as a
SUV,
long-term.
like International
It's
Council.
the ICA.
I'm a member of,
International
and actually
Council.
yes, that's a member. I'm a member of this ICA, but the second one, SUV.
SUV, and I keep forgetting what it stands for, but it's so it's kind of research and university archives. It's a subgroup, and that's a very worthwhile group to be a member of. They do have coffee mornings, so if I don't email you, they've got virtual coffee mornings quite regularly, and it's a great way to be part of a community. And that's something that somebody in your kind of situation, I think it's really necessary.
Absolutely.
To just have that, collegial, regular collegial contact. So drop me a line if I don't drop you a line, just with a contact for those coffee mornings.
Oh yeah, thanks, Jenny. I think there is. You send a link, did you?
Yeah, I think it's the one Clean is talking about.
Is it? Yes, International. Yeah. Okay. So if I'll search, if I won't find sufficient information, I'll just drop you a line. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. So I will just end the recording there.
Thank you very much, Tatiana.
Thanks.
It was a very